Carnaval by Robert Schumann. Like almost every work in this unit, Carnaval has a story to tell, so there's much to learn about it. In fact, the very title of this composition tells you something about it. Carnaval looks and sounds very much like the English word carnival, and carnival is that secular season that precedes the religious penitential season of Lent, the season that leads up to Easter. All of you are familiar, if only through television reports of it, of the practices and of the celebrations that surround Carnival. And among them is that people dress up in costume. They go about the streets disguised as other people. And in fact, Carnival is basically some sort of a mini masked ball in which a number of pieces purport to portray a number of people. Carnaval is a set of character pieces for piano, and each of its constituent movements or pieces is a short one-movement composition that was written for domestic use. And my nickname for this work would be a song cycle without words. If a character piece can be called a song without words, a whole set of them could be called a song cycle without words. We are going to examine only two works from this rather lengthy series of pieces. One of them is entitled Eusebius, and the other one is entitled Florestan. Now there's quite a story to explain these two things, so sit back and take careful note of the details that follow. These two characters, Eusebius and Florestan, were very real to Schumann, and they were just as real to him as were the characters named in the titles of the other songs in Carnaval. Some of them were famous composers and friends of his, and one of them was even his own wife. Now let's see exactly where these characters came from. Schumann, as we recall, was the man who started out as a pianist. He crippled his hands, but he ended up having a very successful career as both a conductor and a director of music. Occasionally, he wrote articles for newspapers and musical magazines. And please remember that this was only an occasional occupation for him. It was something that he did on the side. It was not how he earned his living at all. It was something that he basically did for the fun of it. Indeed, he was very passionate about the cause of new music, and he wrote about new music whenever he had the chance to do so. Now, audiences had changed considerably from the 18th through the 19th centuries. We recall that during the 18th century they wanted new music all the time. That's why composers like Vivaldi, Haydn, and Bach sometimes wrote hundreds of a certain kind of a composition because people did not want to hear the same piece more than once when they went to concerts. All this was to change during the 19th century, and in the 19th century we begin to see the sort of situation that we have in concert halls today. That is, audiences who want to hear the same piece season after season. Now, there's nothing wrong with this, of course, but it is very frustrating for composers. After all, a composer is engaged in the process of creating new music, and he or she wants to have an opportunity to have these compositions heard. Schumann, an enthusiastic proponent of the music of his colleague, thus imagined himself engaged in a battle against musical Philistines. A Philistine is a person who is smug in his own very narrow taste or knowledge of something. Basically the sort of person who says, "Oh, I listen only to jazz," or "Oh, I like only Italian Renaissance art." That's what a Philistine is. And for Schumann, the Philistines with which he was engaged in battle were the conservative concert audiences of his time, who wanted to hear the same pieces over and again from one season to another. And it is this situation, perhaps coupled with his rather fragile state of mind — we recall that Schumann went insane toward the end of his life — that caused him to create something that could deal with this situation. And indeed, he invented his Davidsbund to do so. Take a look at the word Davidsbund. You can see David's in it at the beginning, the possessive. Bund looks a little bit like the word band, and it means David's band or army. And in fact, David's band or army is a biblical reference. Surely you recall the story of David and Goliath, in which a boy is able to slay a giant in a contest. Basically, that's how Schumann pictured himself in this situation. That is, he saw the conservative musical audiences of his time, the musical Philistines as he thought of them, as constituting the giant with which he had to do battle. Schumann's Davidsbund was a very small army indeed, because it had only 3 members, and each of these members represented a person at a different stage of life. Eusebius, for example, was a dreamy youth, a child of about 8 to 10 years of age. You know, that stage in life when people are not exactly quite so focused and disciplined as they become later. That sort of a person whose attention shifts from one subject to another in rapid succession. Florestan represents a person at the next stage of life, someone in his teens. And Florestan is a typical rebellious teenager, someone whose moods change from one minute to another. Now, so far, this isn't much of an army at all. It has only 2 members. One of them is unfocused. The other one is uncontrollable. So it makes perfect sense that there should be a 3rd character to oversee them. And we find it in the person of Meister Raro. Just take a look at that. Meister Raro, it's very easy to see that it means rare master. And Meister Raro represents a mature adult, and he is the character in this army who takes control of the other 2. Now, all 3 of these characters were very real to Schumann. They were just as real to him as were his colleagues mentioned in Canralva, or even his own wife, one of the characters in that set of character pieces as well. And if you take a look at his scores from later on in his lifetime, you will find that sections of his compositions are sometimes attributed to one of these 3 characters. When you hear the pieces Eusebius and Canralva, you will hear the composer's attempts to depict these characters in music. For example, Eusebius is a slow, dreamy composition, a piece that sounds particularly unfocused because it uses very odd groupings of notes and strange cross rhythms, so it seems that one hand is playing somewhat faster than another. A wonderful way to characterize a dreamy, unfocused youth. Florestan represents quite a different personality type. In this very short composition, you will hear sudden changes of mood and tempo in the work. At one moment, quiet and introverted, and the next moment, a sudden outburst and extroverted. Up and down, in very rapid succession. And you can understand thus how composers were doing what they could to support the belief that people held about character pieces during the 19th century, that they could capture the essence of persons, places, etc.